Work in hand. Work in hand can be a really beneficial addition to your training under saddle. Work in hand is great for teaching horses concepts and movements without the weight of the rider, so he just has to deal with his own balance, his own forefeet, and he can process information maybe a little more easily, doesn't require as much strength as if he has to carry the weight of the rider. And so you can do many of the movements in hand that you can do under saddle. You can introduce the movements in hand before you ride them so that the horse is already familiar with the basic movement pattern and the balance and the footfalls and so on. And the first true lateral movement in the training is the shoulder in. Of course, there are other forms of sidestepping, like turns on the forehand in motion and leg yields and enlarging the circle. But the first real lateral movement is the shoulder in. And there are a couple of ways in which you can introduce it to the horse pretty easily. And in this video, I want to show you a couple of options that I like to use. So when I do work in hand, I typically use just a regular snaffle bridle and a whip. Of course, you could use a cabochon or a bitless bridle as well. That's a possibility. But hey, he's distracted. But yeah, I like the plain snaffle and a whip. That's very easy. It's good to experiment a little with different whips, right? With the whip is like an extension of your arm, really, where you can touch different parts of the horse's body to draw his awareness there, to create a little bit more movement. You can use a dressage whip. You can use a work in hand whip. They're typically 5 feet or 1.50 meters long. For this horse, I'm using a driving whip because he responds really well to this little thread here at the end. I get a better response to tickling him with this than to like touching or tapping with a stick. For work in hand, when the whip is elastic and can transmit energy, you can wake the horse up. If you have a very stiff stick that doesn't vibrate at all, then it's good for the super sensitive horses, because then it doesn't agitate the horse, so to speak. So there's a lot of different materials that you can try out, and you'll be surprised at how different the horses can respond to different materials. So I would always recommend that you play and experiment with a number of different lengths and materials to find something that produces a good result with your horse. So I will show you a couple of possibilities of how to introduce the shoulder in to the horse. You can do this under saddle and in hand. So you can start with a circle and ask the haunches to yield a little bit to the outside. That's what Spanish riding school used to call the second test of the inside hind. So you can activate the inside hind. You can make him pick it up a little sooner. It engages the belly muscles of the horse. You can just take this little bit, it's like a shoulder fore position, basically. Take it to the long side and then continue with this a little bit. So there you go. And then after a few strides, you can turn onto a volte. And I like to sometimes then allow the horse to relax a little bit on this volte. Then I could pick the reins up again, ask again for the inside hind to cross, and then he elevates a little more as the inside hind engages more. And as I raise the energy level, I take this onto the long side. I have to half hold into the outside hind, otherwise he gets away from me a little, right? And he pushes a little too much. So pretty good. And then we'll turn onto a volte. I can let him relax. You could also do a couple of voltes, right? You could do one volte where you allow him to stretch a little bit, and then a second volte where you bring him up. You can vary the size of the volte, of course. You could also do a 20-meter circle if you wanted to, or anything between. This is always a really good exercise to engage the inside hind and to increase the energy level. In the beginning, it's not important that you have like a full-fledged shoulder in on 3 or 4 tracks. It's more about giving the horse the idea. It can be more of a shoulder 4. And the degree of the angle depends on the degree of collection. So if your horse can't collect a whole lot yet, you need to keep the angle a little smaller, shallower. And as the degree of collection increases, you can increase the angle. Otherwise, if you make it too steep, you lose the outside hind leg, and then it becomes more of a leg yield. So I'll turn around. Can do this in the other direction. You'll find that one side is going to be a little easier, the other is going to be a little bit more difficult, like with everything else. So it's a result of the crookedness of the horse. So when you introduce this, it makes sense to do this at the walk first. And then once the horse becomes familiar with it, then you can do it at the trot. So here I'm asking him to cross a little with that inside hind. So the outside hind has to support a little bit more, that the inside hind has the time to cross over. There you go. And then we'll take this with us onto the long sides. I'll try to gather up that inside hind under the belly. There you go. And then we'll go into a circle again. So on the circle, he can relax, so to speak, a little bit. He can think for a second, and then we'll gather him up. Also, I made this one a little bit bigger. Yeah, it doesn't really matter. See, and you see how quickly he goes into diagonal steps if you accelerate that inside hind leg. And the trot, he burns a few more calories, of course. It's a little bit more work. Here I have to push a little with my hand against his rib cage, make sure he bends a little bit. I can use my knuckles and push a little bit in the location where my lower leg would be if I were on his back. And then we can take a little break for a second. Ah. Oh boy. So that's one version, right? So you develop the shoulder in or shoulder 4 out of the second test of the inside hind on a circle, right? Where you ask the haunches to yield a little to the outside. That's fairly easy for the horse, fairly comfortable. Then another thing you can try is basically developing it out of a leg yield towards the wall. So we'll go to the short side, wake him up a little. And so instead of going to the end of the short side, you can turn away somewhere, center line or quarter line. For example, like here, this is roughly the quarter line. Then you leg yield out and accelerate the haunches just a little bit. And you let the outside hind leg come to the wall, but not the outside front. And then very casually, you end up with a shoulder 4 or shoulder in type posture. So that's also fairly simple. Also something you could ride under saddle as well as do it in hand. And of course now my volte will arrive at the long side. So this is something you can do only once on the long side. And then your volte starts and ends in the same place on the long side, but then you could switch to the other option. So we'll do this in the other direction as well. Yeah. So I always tend to change direction with a turn on the forehand. That's a nice hip suppling exercise. So now let's go a little bit towards the end. So here I'm letting him sidestep a little bit, but just to give myself more space. So we begin here on the short side again. And so somewhere around the quarter line, we'll turn the outside shoulder with my outside rein. And then I touch a little here, inside hind. I slow down the outside shoulder. I speed up the inside hind. And we, sometimes he bickers a little. So we end up with a shoulder in position or shoulder forward position. And then let's go on to a volte. So when horses are not familiar yet with the new movement, don't try to ride it the entire long side. Just ask for a few steps and then exit again, for example, by riding a volte. That's always a good way to get out of the shoulder in. Or you could go onto a diagonal. Under saddle, that's often convenient to go onto a diagonal line. So those Pixie deserves a treat. So these would be two very convenient ways in which you can develop the shoulder in. You could also develop it. Or you could also develop it out of a turn on the forehand in motion. So yeah, maybe I'll start in this direction since we're already here. And it's an exercise I actually like to use as a warm-up. So you could begin on a single track, whole school, to fire up the hind legs a little bit. So then at some point here, I'll make a 90-degree turn away from the wall just to create a little space for myself. And then I ask him for a turn on the forehand in motion. And then I could go, a little bit of a shoulder forward, shoulder in position to the long side. And here, this turn could also be a little bit like a turn on the forehand in motion, and continue here, shoulder in, turn away, and turn on the forehand in motion maybe. And you could go back to the wall on a single track, of course, or you can do a little bit of a shoulder forward, shoulder in, maybe here again, a little hint of turn on the forehand, few steps on the long side, turn away, and turn on the forehand in motion. So he goes around me. It's a really good hip suppling exercise. It creates great mobility, lateral mobility in the hindquarters. So we'll stop, change direction, do it in the other direction. This is a little bit more intense, you can tell. So the other ones were a little bit more casual, but it's good to have choices, right? It's good to have a number of options that you can use to introduce something to your horse. Because some options will work better than others. So here we'll turn away from the wall and turn on the forehand in motion. I'll push him a little around me. Up. And little shoulder forward to shoulder in, back to the wall. Activate that inside hind. I like to use turns, corners, turns on the forehand to activate and speed up the inside hind leg. That helps me to lift the withers, helps me to get the horse into a more uphill balance. There you go. And then again, a little bit shoulder forward to shoulder in. And yeah, there you go. And you see how quickly and easily they diagonalize the steps. If you just activate the inside hind, if you ask him to kick the inside hind leg up a little sooner, especially when you're on a volte or a corner. Oops. So you see how quickly this can turn into half steps or hiaf steps. He's familiar already with this a little bit, of course. But you'll see that some of your horses, if they have a talent for the piaffe, they will offer you diagonal steps, like half steps, at certain points in these exercises, like especially if you are in the walk, you ask the inside hind leg to lift up when the outside front leg lifts up. So then you shorten the window between the outside front lifting and the inside hind lifting, and so that leads to diagonalization. And if the horse has a bit of a talent, you'll be surprised how quickly some horses will offer steps that already look pretty close to half steps or piaffe steps. Doesn't mean that they can do a piaffe now, but it just shows you that there is a talent there, and it shows you how biomechanically some setups and some exercises give the horse the idea that, yeah, piaffe is an option or half steps are an option. So you can utilize these when you actually want to teach the piaffe. So these would be 3 possibilities for introducing the shoulder in, shoulder for to your horse if he's never done this before. And if you want to know more, we also offer a course on work in hand where I explain exactly these types of things in detail, and you'll find the link in the comments or in the description. So if you found the information useful, then click like and subscribe and turn on the notifications, and see you in the next video.